Hi, everyone. I am Stephanie Bacchus-Downer, and I am co-president of the Princeton Club of Northern California. Welcome to our sleep workshop, and thank you so much to the Columbia Alumni Association of Northern California for helping us organize this event, co-hosting, and now this is their Zoom account that we are using, so thank you so much for managing the muting and unmuting and all of the logistics behind it. I want to do a super quick introduction to Kristen. Kristen Rainey is class of 1997 from Princeton, and after a 6-year tenure at Google, where she was managing the food programs and also had a hand in sustainability and some sleep workshops, she has now founded and is the CEO of North Star Sleep School. And we're very excited for Kristen to be joining us today. This is part of a wellness initiative spearheaded by Columbia, and we have participants from other Ivy groups, so Cornell and Brown, and also the Princeton alumni of New England. So with that, I will pass it over to Kristen. We'll do a brief introduction to herself and the sleep workshop, and then we will have the leadership of these other alumni clubs give a quick hi, and then we will dive into the workshop itself. So go ahead, Kristen.
Great,
and welcome everyone.
Welcome. It's great to have such a great turnout tonight. Feel free, while we're just getting started, feel free to introduce yourselves on the chat board. Feel free to share your school affiliation and your class year if you like, as well as where you're based right now. That would be just really interesting for us to see where everyone's coming from. Great. I'm excited to get started in just a minute. We just have a few more intros and welcomes.
Should we have leadership from Columbia start out with a quick hello?
Thanks, Stephanie. This is Arianna. I'm currently the president of Columbia Alumni Association of NorCal, and I wanted to welcome everybody. We have board members here. We also have Ashley Love, who's one of our directors of the Health and Wellness Initiative. So also we have other board members, so feel free to have a thumbs up and wave to everybody in the group, and we look forward to more collaborations, and hopefully you enjoy this workshop and get the most out of it. So enjoy.
And if we have Cornell or Brown people, hop on your leadership to say a quick hi, and if not, we will go ahead into Kristen. So.
All right,
everyone is saying hi on the chat, so that'd be great. We'll be able to have the Q&A.
Take that as a sign to get started.
Yeah.
So welcome again. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to share more with you a topic that's taken on increased importance for me personally, so much so that I left my job at Google at the end of January, and I'm now focusing my time and energy launching North Star Sleep School, which is a business focused on sharing with others how they can get better sleep. So here's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to share background on the course. We'll dispel some sleep myths. We'll talk about stages of sleep, what's actually happening during the night to our bodies. We'll go over the risks of not getting enough sleep. We'll talk about caffeine and alcohol, your bedroom environment, and the importance of a wind down routine. Because this is such a large group with over 200 people registered, please use the chat board to chime in on all the questions I'll be asking of you. And thanks so much to everyone for doing all the introductions. It's great to see what a broad range of schools and geographies. So first, a little context on how this webinar got off the ground. This was a photo taken at a passport shop in Portland, Oregon, where I used to live in 2018. And I was trying to figure out how to get a Chinese visa, an Indian visa, at the same time for upcoming trips. I didn't have enough passport pages. I couldn't part with my current passport for any of those issues because I needed it for an upcoming work trip to Copenhagen in 10 days. And I was stressed, I was tired, and you can see it in the photo. And that year in 2018, I flew 175,000 miles for work. That doesn't include personal trips. And I learned that prioritizing my job above everything else, which I was doing, had a real cost. I was on the road all the time. It was not uncommon for me to be up at 3:45 a.m. for flights. And it's really a brutal way to start the week. I know some of you probably before COVID were probably road warriors as well. And when you know on a Saturday night that you're going to be getting up at 3:45 a.m. on Monday morning, it's likely that you might, leave whatever dinner party or event you're at before dessert's even served because you're already thinking about that Monday morning flight. So this erosion of my personal life, it didn't happen overnight, it happened gradually. And it wasn't just my work life that wasn't in balance, it was also my personal life. I thought it was reasonable while I was already in London for work to tack on a 10-hour flight to visit a friend in Nairobi for 3 days. It was totally worth it. It was actually a good friend from Princeton. It's totally worth it, but it was exhausting. And when I'd get home from overseas work trips, it was not uncommon for me to hop on my bike and go for an 80-mile bike ride because that's how I could clear my head. My body was tired, but I went anyway because I've never been very good at sitting on the couch. So messy hair is a constant, I get that, but you can see a much more well-rested, happier individual in the photo on the right in 2020. Truth be told, I've been sleep deprived my entire life. It's not isolated to Google work travel and the ensuing jet lag. Even when I was a little kid, I wanted to stay up as late as my older brother, the kid on the left, who also happens to be a night owl, also happens to be Princeton 95 and in NorCal, but he's not on the call. And after staying up too late night after night trying to keep up with my brother, I suffered the painful consequences of the next morning when I felt so tired, I felt Velcroed to my bed. And when I played sports in high school and then later I played lacrosse at Princeton, we often had away games where we'd be sitting on a bus for very long periods of time. And sometimes I found myself disappointed when we'd arrive at the destination because it meant that my much needed nap was over. So as I started to prioritize sleep and realize how truly essential it is, I became inspired to teach it to fellow Google employees as a 90-minute crash course. So every time I traveled to another office for meetings for my day job, I would teach Sleep 101. And counterintuitively, right around the time that I started to pay attention to sleep, my health took a nosedive. Last July, I was diagnosed with the Epstein-Barr virus. It's actually quite common, and a lot of people are familiar with it as mono, which many kids get in college from staying up late or partying too much or not getting enough nutritious food. I got it actually in high school, not from any of those things, but just from studying too much and playing 3 sports. And then I got it again last summer, and it can wreak a lot of havoc on your body, and I felt like I'd been run over by a truck. I'm a very active person, and I couldn't even work out. So my body said enough's enough. Eventually, I left my job altogether. I moved to Bozeman, Montana this winter. And perhaps one silver lining of COVID is it's really forced me to be less overscheduled, which doesn't come naturally to me. So what's the point of this webinar? That brings us to tonight. Tonight, my goal is to inspire you to prioritize sleep and to agree with me that we just can't afford to not prioritize it. Rest is such a huge component of having balance. Hopefully you won't reach the point of Epstein-Barr virus or total burnout like I did before coming to this conclusion. It's both a quantity issue and a quality issue. It's not just about more hours in bed, although that's part of it, but it's also about ensuring the sleep that we do get is as restorative as it can be. And now with COVID, it's a really unusual time, as all of you know. Many of you are working from home, which you might not have been doing before. Work and personal boundaries are blurred. Some of you are homeschooling children while trying to maintain your jobs. Some of you are dealing with more stress and anxiety than ever before about 100 things, about COVID, about racial injustice, about how to teach your son's 3rd grade math class. So it's great that all of you have taken the time to explore such an important topic tonight. So we're going to use the chat board for this one, a 200-person icebreaker. So I want you to think about in your own lives, what has been the best night of sleep you've ever had, or what's been the environment where you have felt like you've gotten the best night of sleep? It's important to talk about this because I think that there are elements of these environments and situations that we can try to replicate in our regular daily lives. So for any brave individuals, I think it would be fantastic to write in the chat board, is there a special location where you've gotten your best sleep? Was it on vacation, for example, when you weren't stressed out by work? Was it perhaps, was it in some other situation? Feel free if you have any examples of a time when you felt really, really well rested. Would love to hear that. These are two screenshots from my cell phone from the app of my Oura ring. If any of you are not familiar with Oura, this is a ring. It's a sleep tracker that I've been wearing for 18 months. And these two screenshots are showing my best sleep ever. This is actually from a rustic hot springs in Oregon, where I've spent many, many visits. My total sleep was 9 hours and 56 minutes with no awakenings all night long. What's unclear to me is how this is a 94 score and not a 99 or 100. I don't know how you can get better, because I certainly don't know what's better than this, but essentially it was a perfect night of sleep for me. And, it's not a mystery as to why. And I've learned a lot from going back there and going back there and going back there. I don't drink caffeine there. I don't drink alcohol there. I eat a really healthy vegetarian dinner before 7 p.m. I don't eat after that. I spend the days soaking in hot springs, hiking and reading. I can't use my phone or any other technology because they don't work there. And I've learned that my body really likes all of those things. It gets dark early. I get in bed. I read in my sleeping bag. I go to sleep. I'm asleep by 9:30 at night. So I think there's a lot of learnings, and I think it can be really interesting. And I think there's a lot of really great examples in the chat board. So thanks to everyone for contributing there. Similarly, how do we avoid all the factors that contribute to your worst night of sleep ever? My top worst nights were probably at various Princeton reunions over the years when I didn't go to bed at all. Feel free to type into the chat board an example of one of your worst nights of sleep ever. Maybe you were stressed out about a job interview the next day or a really important presentation. Maybe you were waiting for really important news you were worried about. Maybe you were in the waiting room of a hospital waiting for a loved one. Maybe you were stranded at an airport on a layover. These are all examples, and I think it can be interesting sometimes to think about, because I think we can learn a lot, especially about how stress really impacts our sleep and how it can interfere with a great night of sleep. So let's turn to this past week. Many of you, especially those who registered early and had access to the Google Sheet I shared, many of you took the opportunity to track your sleep for 7 nights and added it. Let's take a look. So here is a screenshot of that sheet. And my guess is that some of you might actually have a sleep tracker. Feel free, if you have one, if you want to share in the chat board, if you have a Fitbit or an Oura Ring or some other sleep tracker. The rest of you were making estimates on how much sleep you got the night before. And a few things to keep in mind. When we estimate our sleep the night before, it's very common to overestimate how much sleep we've gotten. So as an example, if I went to bed at 10 p.m. and I woke up at 6 a.m., it would be easy to conclude I got 8 hours of sleep. But in reality, it takes time to fall asleep. We often wake up during the night, even if we're not aware of it the next day. And so the actual number of hours slept is often less than those 8 that I thought about if I went to bed at 10 and woke up at 6. So when you think about your own average over the past week, whether you tracked it in this sheet or whether you did it separately or not, was this typical for you? Or do you think it was higher than normal because you were focused on tracking it? In other words, was it like the Hawthorne effect where we're modifying our behavior because we're aware of being observed or being in an experiment or whatever? So to address the elephant in the room, I had put my name on as an example so that people could see how the sheet worked. And as the week went on, I was realizing and getting increasingly concerned that my sleep was nowhere near what it normally is. So, this was not a great week for me. In fact, it was probably the worst week I've had since January. And part of me thought I should probably discontinue entering this into the public tracker because then nobody's going to show up to the webinar on Monday seeing these results. But I think it's really important. We all have good nights and we have nights that are not so good. I'm human too. And actually, this was a great reminder to me this week that the sleep I got, which the average was under 7, was not enough for me. And I felt terrible last week in every way. I felt like I didn't make good food choices. My workouts weren't as good. I didn't have as much productivity. And, frankly, it made me emotional. I turn into like a 7-year-old when I don't get enough sleep. So it was actually a very good reminder to me, although a painful one. Being well rested is really a game changer for me. So how do you all think that your group, the chunk of people who added to the sheet, how do you think it compares to other groups that I've taught? Do you think that this is overall good? We average 7 hours a night. where do you think that fits into? Do you think that's really good, or do you think that that's low, or do you think that's high compared to other groups? Think about Google employees and other groups that I might have taught. High, typical, could be better. 7 is high. Yeah. So actually, you know, this is where it fits into other groups and individuals that I've taught for whatever it's worth. But what's interesting is, you know, even the students I've worked with who started with, you know, 5.7 or 5.8 have had massive increases. So there's always opportunity for all of us to go up. So let's talk about a few myths about sleep. So here's the fundamental question of, like, how much do we actually need? We're really busy people, right? There's a lot of other things we'd like to be doing. How many of you have heard this, or you've said this yourself, that you only need 5 or 6, right? We've all heard this, right? Or said it ourselves. The truth is, only 1% of the population ranges from the recommended 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. And that goes in both directions. So there's actually a few people who need more than 9 hours, and a few people who are truly okay with getting less than 7. This 1% is actually a genetic mutation. You know, you might be really skilled at being fully functional and looking awake and seemingly alert, because maybe this is how you've been functioning for years or for your whole life. But instead of framing it as how much can I get by on, a different way to look at this is, how could I be at my absolute best in every part of my life, from a productivity perspective, from a physical perspective, and from a well-being perspective. So Fitbit, which, you know, many of you might already be using Fitbit, but this is just one, you know, piece of data that the average Fitbit user is getting 6 hours and 38 minutes a night. So actually this group, as far as the average of those of you who are tracking at 7 hours, is actually higher than the average Fitbit user, which is great. It's only fairly recently we've really truly started being sleep deprived. This is a Gallup chart, and it's showing that in 1942, the average sleep was 7.9 hours a night, whereas today it's 6.8. And it's even more dramatic with kids. So, you know, 5 to 18-year-olds we're sleeping 2 hours fewer per night now than our counterparts 100 years ago. All right, how many of you have heard this one, or you've said this yourself? Unfortunately, we can't bank sleep. We need it every day. And while there might be some recovery you can get from sleeping well on the day after a night of sleeping poorly, the best thing we can all do is consistently get good sleep throughout the week. So think of every night as its own unique opportunity. This image might look familiar to some of you Princeton alums. So enter your ideas into the chat board if you have any ideas where did this image come from. And I'll come back in a second to the answer. So like busyness, it's a source of pride for many people that they'll sleep when they're dead. And now is the time for living. And I dispute that. We really need to rethink that notion. We can get the most out of every day if we're really well rested. From a learning and memory perspective, getting sufficient sleep is actually the most efficient thing we can do. So the joke's kind of on us, for all of us who, you know, used to pull all-nighters in college studying for exams. We would have been better off just going to bed. And the benefits are beyond just learning and memory. Without enough sleep, our body experiences increased inflammation. We experience the increased stress hormone cortisol. And it's actually shocking the number of health issues we're dealing with in our bodies, when in fact, if we were well rested, many of those issues might not be as severe, or they might not be issues at all. All right, no guesses on where this sleep is for the week? Ah, yes, thank you, Katie. Small World Coffee in Princeton, New Jersey. Nice job. So Matthew Walker, who wrote this quote, he is a professor at UC Berkeley, and he's the author of a great book called Why We Sleep. And he also consults at Verily, which is the life sciences company at Alphabet. So unfortunately, many well-known people, including world leaders with enormous responsibilities, didn't get the memo, and they haven't or don't prioritize sleep. Thomas Edison thought it was a total waste of time, and he tried to minimize it. He would follow a polyphasic sleep cycle. So he'd have many sleep sessions over a 24-hour period, and he got 3 hours total of sleep during a 24-hour period. Da Vinci was even more extreme. He would take a 20-minute nap every 4 hours, which means over a 24-hour period, he slept 2 hours total. And Obama doesn't get a lot of sleep. Hopefully he's getting more now that he's not in office, but he only got 6 hours a night when he was president, but he cherished the hours that he did get. So aides at the White House used to have to make tough decisions about whether to wake him or not, whether the crisis was important enough. Thatcher slept 4 a night. Trump claims to sleep 3 a night. And I'd argue that everyone on this screen got to where they were not because of their massive sleep deprivation, but in spite of it. And I really wonder what their lives might have looked like or what they might have accomplished had they been truly well rested. In contrast, these are some of today's business leaders who do prioritize sleep. Just as a few examples, Jeff Bezos tries to get 8 hours every night, and he credits being well rested with helping him tackle decision fatigue. While Mark Bertolini was CEO of Aetna Insurance, he would actually incentivize his employees to get enough rest. He would say that if employees there could get 20 nights of sleep of 7 hours or more in a row, they'd get $25 a night as a bonus. So this incentive encourages continuity, and I can't say enough about this. Consistently getting 7 to 9 a night without running a sleep debt during the week is so important. And then Arianna Huffington, many know her story, that she suffered from total exhaustion 10 years ago and now has a business called Thrive, dedicated to taking care of yourself. She's really dedicated to having a wind down routine at night, and she removes all devices from the bedroom, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's dig into the stages of sleep. What's actually happening during the night? Here's a typical progression throughout a night of sleep. So you have multiple cycles each night, and each cycle is typically 90 to 110 minutes and includes both rapid eye movement, or REM, shown in the orange peach color. That's when you're dreaming. And then it also includes non-rapid eye movement, or non-REM, shown in blue, which is when you're not dreaming. One of the things to pay attention to is that your REM sleep is the sleep stage most similar in terms of brain activity to your awake state. Another thing to note is that deep, non-rapid eye movement sleep is concentrated early in a night of sleep, and most of your REM sleep, when you're dreaming, happens later in a night of sleep. So you can see more orange on the right later in the night of sleep. So we've said REM is rapid eye movement when you're dreaming, and non-REM is non-rapid eye movement when you're not dreaming. But what does each stage actually provide for our body and for our mind? So REM has 2 goals. So the first is that it organizes your brain's filing cabinet. It helps you remember details of your experiences and integrates them with your existing knowledge. Once they're cleaned up, your brain is better able to learn new things the next day. It's like clearing your short-term memory cache. The second one, which I think is the most interesting, is emotional soothing. So when your brain is in REM, it's the only time in a 24-hour period when your body isn't making the anxiety-triggering molecule called noradrenaline. So your brain's actually processing the day's events, like a stressful meeting with a teammate or a difficult conversation with a friend or a spouse, in a calm environment. And this allows you to wake up with a fresh outlook. We all dream in varying amounts every night, and just because you don't remember a dream in the morning doesn't mean you didn't have any dreams that night. So many try to avoid having bad dreams, right? Nobody wants to have an unpleasant dream, but actually they're a good thing. It means your brain is working through challenges. In non-REM, your brain and your body and your mind are experiencing the restorative benefits of sleep. Your brain waves are slowing down significantly, and your heart and blood vessels, as well as your muscle tissues, repair themselves. So many have asked in the past, like, which is more important, REM or non-REM? And the answer is they're both important. You don't get to choose. They're both performing different benefits for your body. So what happens when we don't get enough, which is often the case, and which was the case for me last week for sure. So I don't think any of us on this webinar would dream of pulling out one of these crusty dishes from the dishwasher when it clearly hadn't been cleaned. But that's exactly what's happening in our brain when we try to function when we're not fully rested. So in our brains, we have these things called glial cells. And when we're in non-REM, our glial cells shrink significantly. And that's a good thing. Because the glial cells, if they're represented by their plates, it's like the plates are shrinking and allowing more of the water to clean them out and clean them better. In our brain, we have cerebral spinal fluid that's cleaning out all the metabolic refuse from the day. So when we don't get sufficient sleep, our brain cells look like these large dirty plates, and amyloid plaques build up in the brain. And there's a lot of evidence that getting too little sleep across your adult lifespan can increase your risk of getting Alzheimer's. It's worth noting both Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were both very vocal about only getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night, and both did end up getting Alzheimer's. It might be a coincidence. While there are innumerable health implications from not getting enough rest, I'm just going to focus on a few tonight. The first is about how sleep deprivation impacts learning and memory. So if you don't sleep well, think about the first night after you're learning something. You'll lose the chance to consolidate those memories, even if you get lots of good sleep later in the week. So this is true whether you're studying for an exam, taking a language class, playing an instrument, or learning anything at all. So you need great sleep that night after learning to lock in those memories, kind of like a save button, which is what Matthew Walker calls it. And you also need great sleep the night before a day of learning to prepare your brain for learning new things. Have any of you noticed when you're sleep deprived, you crave certain foods? Feel free if you're open to mentioning them in the chat board. I will admit that when I'm massively jet lagged and in other places for work, I make horrible decisions, especially for breakfast. I'll choose the croissant rather than the steel cut oatmeal. And what's actually happening is our hormones change when we're sleep deprived. We have 2 hormones that regulate hunger and appetite. One is called leptin, and leptin normally lets you know when you're full. So when you're sleep deprived, you make less of this and you're less likely to feel full. And at the same time, when you're sleep deprived, you have increased levels of another hormone, ghrelin, which lets you know when you're hungry. In addition, as some of you have mentioned in the chat board, you crave unhealthy things, right? Cookies and chocolate and ice cream and bread and pasta and salty snacks. Finally, as another issue, when you're not getting enough sleep, your body gets stingy about giving up fat. The encouraging thing about all of this is that when you do get enough sleep, it helps control body weight. And plentiful sleep makes your gut happier. It calms the fight or flight sympathetic branch, which improves the bacterial community known as your microbiome. We talk so much about drunk driving and everyone knows that's a no-no, but actually more people die on the road from fatigue-related accidents than from drugs and alcohol combined. There's an accident caused by sleepiness every 30 seconds in the US. And every hour, there's an accident caused by sleepiness in which somebody dies. So what happens is you have these micro sleeps where your eyelids partially close, and a lot can happen in a very short period of time when you're operating a car. If you go 10 days in a row of getting 6 hours of sleep each night, that is the equivalent from a performance perspective of going without sleep for 24 hours straight. And this really hit home for me. We all underestimate our degree of performance disability. And I think about how many times I came back from international trips, and then depending on where I was living, sometimes I drove myself home from the airport, and I really shouldn't have been driving. So this really hit home for me. So our circadian rhythm is our body's internal clock. And that helps regulate our sleep-wake cycle in every 24-hour period. This is a diagram showing how our hormones of cortisol and melatonin are changing throughout that 24-hour period. So in this diagram, the light blue background is showing daytime and the navy background is showing night. In addition to that, you see 2 squiggly lines. You see a red one showing cortisol and the blue one showing melatonin. So this diagram is showing how those hormones typically rise and fall depending on what time of day it is. So in a typical day, your cortisol spikes in the morning and then declines until it's very low at night. For melatonin, it's highest in the middle of the night. And this diagram illustrates why it's so challenging to do shift work or to be jet lagged, because our bodies are out of sync with the natural environment of light and dark. This is why the blue light from our devices, like our phones and tablets and laptops, is so problematic, because that blue light is delaying the onset of our sleep hormone melatonin and pushing ahead the time for us to fall asleep. This diagram is also showing how critical it is to have consistency of your sleep time, having the same pattern throughout the week, going to bed at the same time and getting up around the same time 7 days a week. So one thing to think about, if you're truly committed to improving your sleep, could you commit to a sleep schedule that would work for you? Meaning, could you go to bed and get up around the same time, whether it's tonight, a Monday night, or whether it's a Friday night? This is really, really hard, but if there's like one takeaway from this class, and there's one thing you could do that could improve your sleep, this would be it. The ideal state you want to get to is when you start waking up without your alarm. Has anyone read Atomic Habits by James Clear? It's a great book. one of the things he talks about is how we build habits. And this is really helpful when you think about sleep and sleep patterns. So since sleep consistency is so critical, and it's one of the most impactful things you could do, this one is worth focusing on. And here's an example. I will get in bed at 11 p.m. for the next 7 nights at my house. I know the at my house part is a little random, but being really specific about location and time is really helpful. Other people add into their calendar reminders of like, hey, I'm committed to, getting in bed by 9 o'clock because I know it'll take me a while to fall asleep, or whatever the case may be. So 2 specific things are huge challenges for our sleep. One of them is coffee. I don't know about you, but I've learned to really like coffee quite a lot. And what's happening in our body is it's tricking us into feeling like we're alert and awake. And what happens is caffeine blocks the sleepiness signal that's normally communicated to your brain by adenosine. And that seems like no big deal, but the problem is caffeine stays in our system. And a half-life of any drug, as many of you know, is how long it takes for your body to remove 50% of its concentration. So for caffeine, the half-life is 5 to 7 hours. That means that if you have a cup of coffee at 3 p.m., it's still in your system at 10 p.m. Half of it is. So many of us fail to make the link between having a bad night of sleep and thinking about our caffeine from the day before. The other thing is a lot of us have switched to decaf after dinner thinking we're doing the right thing. And while it's better than regular coffee, decaf is not actually entirely absent of caffeine. It still has 15 to 30% of the dose of a regular cup of coffee. So that's something to consider. And then, what worked for us 10 years ago might not work for us today. Our bodies change and how we process caffeine changes. And for some of us, we're less tolerant and it takes us longer to metabolize it. And then there's other things besides coffee, of course, that have caffeine. Tea, for one. I don't know about you guys, but I really like pu'er tea, and that has a crazy amount of caffeine in it. I still drink it and still like it, but I'm very careful about how late in the day I drink it. Chocolate has caffeine, and then some medications do, like migraine medication, some painkillers like aspirin, ibuprofen, and some prescription drugs like beta blockers that reduce your blood pressure. They all have caffeine, so it's just worth being mindful of. So I used to work at Google, and at Google we provided meals and cafes to our employees. And in addition to cafes, we had snack beverage areas called micro kitchens. And this was a conversation I overheard a few months ago while I was still there. If I had a Red Bull right now, I will totally finish my project today. But I also won't be able to sleep at all tonight. And what's interesting in this comment is that it reveals the issue of sacrificing long-term productivity and wellness for short-term wins. It's possible this was an important enough deadline that it may have been worth it. But what I know is that at Google or anywhere else I've worked, I can't afford to sacrifice a day of productivity because I'm not rested. I need and want to be highly productive every day. Alcohol, let's talk about this for a second. Many people think they sleep a lot better after a few beers or cocktails or a glass of wine, etc. But what's actually happening is you might fall asleep easier, but alcohol is just sedating you, not dissimilar to how a light anesthesia would put you under. Unfortunately, when we have alcohol in our system, our sleep ends up not being as restorative. We end up with a night filled with a lot of brief awakenings. And more significantly, alcohol is one of the most powerful suppressors of REM sleep we know of. So even moderate drinking in the afternoon or evening can actually deprive you of that valuable dream sleep. And remember, we talked about that dream sleep as being really important for helping regulate our emotions each day. So here are just a couple of reminders of trying to avoid caffeine after 2 p.m. and trying to avoid alcohol at least 3 hours before sleep, or even trying to minimize it or even remove it altogether. Unfortunately, that's actually the best thing we could do, is actually not drink at all. So let's take a look at our bedroom environment. These are some things to think about when you go to bed tonight. Light, temperature, technology, and noise are all challenges. So be honest, how many of you bring a device to bed with you? You like to read your laptop, or you read your phone in bed, or you read your iPad in bed. This is really, really common. This is like, I think I know more people who do this than who don't do this now. Yeah, I see a few people in the chat board. Thanks for being honest. You're not alone, but what I'd like to share is that when we're doing that, the blue light that emanates from our screens, it delays the onset of melatonin. And melatonin is what signals to our body it's time for us to go to sleep. In addition to the blue light, it's also really tempting to respond to one more work email or to start reading really stressful news. And I don't know about you, but it seems like all the news these days is really depressing and stressful and causes me to have many, many more spinning thoughts. So it's not just the blue light, it's also where the information takes our brains, and it's not calming. 90% of individuals regularly use some sort of electronic portable device 60 minutes or less before bedtime. So, you know, you're not alone. Here are a few options. Some people have found that developing some sort of a strict schedule with themselves can be really helpful about when to turn off their gadgets. So for example, one might be no phones, no iPads, no laptops after dinner, or it might be 3 hours before bed. The earlier, the better. I know this is depressing news. Also, turning off all your ringers and putting devices in another room. Okay, maybe some of you might be needing to be reached in an emergency, but if you can, try to turn off all your ringers. Even putting your phone in airplane mode can be great. Some say no technology at all in the bedroom. Some people switch and only read from printed books or magazines in the evenings. That's probably the best thing you can do. If those options that I just shared are really not options, and you know you think I'm crazy, other things you can do are switching your devices to the night mode, which you can switch in settings, or you can get an app called Flux, which will help with reducing the blue light at night. Finally, another option is getting blue blocker glasses that you can order anywhere like Amazon, and they block against blue light. So temperature is another issue. Many of us keep our bedrooms too warm. Everyone has slightly different preferences, but in general, it's better for our bedrooms to be between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit. So think about when you go to your bedroom tonight, think about what is the temperature, and are there ways you might be able to adjust it? So how about noise? Think about your environment from the street, from your neighbors, from your toddler, from your teenager. Do any of you struggle with noise? This can be have a real impact on your sleep. Or maybe it's noise from your partner. A quick fix here is investing in some good earplugs. Even though they don't block out everything, they can often make the difference between whether you wake up or not during the night. Thanks for mentioning the Flux app in the chat board. So here are just the suggested next steps on technology. Trying to turn off your cell phone, move it to another room before you go to bed, avoid screens at least 2 hours before bedtime. Earlier is even better. In terms of light, keeping your bedroom as dark as possible. Using an eye mask is one solution there. Temperature, keeping your bedroom between 60 and 67 degrees. And from a noise perspective, trying to keep your bedroom as quiet as possible. So let's talk about a wind down routine. Think about how you spend, after dinner, how you spend the evening. Exercise can be very, very helpful with sleep. If you can do it outside, even better, because the light is very helpful. That natural light during the day actually helps you sleep at night. But if you exercise very late in the day, like after dinner, right before bed, it could interfere with your sleep. So be wary of what time of day. Eating late is less than ideal. So try to bump up your dinner time to several hours before you head to bed. And some people find that taking a hot shower or a hot bath, or if you're fortunate enough to have access to a sauna or a hot tub, even better, they have great results. And what happens is that counterintuitively, being in a hot bath or a hot shower actually cools down your body a couple of degrees, helping you prepare it for sleep. Other suggestions for a wind down routine, helping encourage your body and reminding it it's time for bed, are dimming lights after dinner or even switching to candles, reading a real book or magazine as opposed to an electronic version, listening to relaxing music, drinking herbal tea, spending time with a loved one. These are all great things to do to signal to your body that it's time for bed. So here are some takeaways. The vast majority of adults need 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. You can't make up for sleep debt on the weekends. We need it consistently. Maintaining a consistent sleep schedule all 7 nights per week is key. Your circadian rhythm regulates your sleep-wake schedule throughout the 24-hour period. Caffeine, alcohol, light, noise, temperature, eating, and exercise all impact our sleep. And the good news is we all have control over them. It's important to ensure your bedroom environment is conducive to good sleep. Having a regular wind down routine signals to your body that it's time for sleep. Developing a cutoff time for technology can also help with your sleep. So here are a few things that you can start doing today. Consistency is critical. So I'd love for all of you to think about, what is a schedule, for those of you who are willing, I understand this is unreasonable for some of you, but if you are willing to try this, what is a schedule that you could reasonably stick to for 7 days of the week, Monday night through next Sunday night? And if anyone is brave, I encourage you to share with others, what are you going to commit to on the chat board? Because sometimes sharing and writing things down and can also be really helpful for accountability. Another thing that can be really helpful is actually writing in your calendar what you're going to do and thinking about it for the rest of the week. Any brave souls? All right, thanks, Judy. 1 a.m. to 9 a.m. Okay, great. I'm committing to 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. this week. That's my goal. The second thing is, being mindful of both caffeine and alcohol. Think about the type, think about the timing, and think about the quantity. For some of us, different alcohol affects us differently. Unfortunately for me, for some reason, beer doesn't sit as well with me in the evening. So if I have an IPA, even just one at 6 p.m., my sleep is destroyed that night, which is very sad. So think about your own life and think about, maybe there's times where maybe you don't need that drink. Maybe you can go for a walk or do something else relaxing instead. Great, thanks for those folks who are committing to their different times. That's great, thanks, that's awesome. The third thing is adjusting your bedroom environment and developing a wind down routine. Think about making your bedroom a sacred space just for sleeping. And think about a wind down routine, paying special attention to blue light. So just as an example, could you commit to turning off all your electronic devices an hour before bed, as just an example? So feel free, if anyone's willing to write in the chat board, great job on writing down your new sleep schedule for the week, but also feel free to write down if there's anything that you might tweak in your environment. So is it something you might change, like the light in your bedroom, like getting blackout shades or getting an eye mask? Or is it thinking about the noise? Maybe you can get a fan that'll block out some of the noise maybe from outside. Think about the temperature in your bedroom. Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Think about how long you stay on all your devices. Do you have to get back on the computer after dinner? Some people do, but is there a way perhaps that you could either use the Flux app or use the night settings mode, or cut yourself off at 8 p.m. instead of 10 p.m.? It can make a huge difference, and it's something worth trying. Yeah, these are great. Thanks for all these comments in the chat board. This is great. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I find I do think, there is a time and a great place to have. I do have an iPad and I read on my iPad. It can be great to maybe you can read your iPad or your Kindle during the day, and maybe you have a paper book that you read at night. Thinking just through about how to make changes and still enjoy reading on our iPads or our laptops, but just thinking about not doing it late at night. If any of you are interested in learning more about sleep, I have online and in-person workshops, and my website, KristenRainey.com, has lots of information about it if any of you are interested. In addition to that, I'm starting a podcast this month where I'm going to be interviewing people who have really interesting stories. Stories about sleep, stories about burnout, stories about transformation, stories about transitions, stories about self-care. If you know someone or you yourself have a great story that you'd like to share, I'd love to hear from you. So please, please reach out. And these are the dates of the upcoming online sleep classes. It's a 6-week class. It meets for 1 hour each week. You can sign up as an individual and be part of a small group, which caps at 8 students, or you can work one-on-one with me, or you can join as a pair if you have a friend who would like to take a class. I also have custom programs, so if you have a team at work or a social group that you'd like to explore working with me on, please feel free to reach out. Here's all my contact info. And if there's questions, I'm gonna start trying to answer some of these questions in the chat board. Connie asks, what about naps? Do you recommend them? This is a great question. I think naps can be really great as long as they're not too late in the day. I would recommend short naps, and I would say like after 2 p.m. I wouldn't take any more naps, because when you start taking naps late in the afternoon, it starts to interfere with your ability to get a good night's sleep the next night. I do a whole session in my sleep course on traveling and dealing with jet lag, and I actually recommend avoiding naps when you're trying to get into a new time zone and trying to suck it up the whole day that you're in a new time zone by trying to get daylight, trying to get exercise, and trying to stay awake till 9 p.m. But in a normal schedule, yeah, I think naps can be great as long as they're short. What about melatonin? Melatonin, yeah, there's a lot of really interesting debate about melatonin. I'm not a doctor, so it's always worth checking with your doctor first, but I think melatonin can be very helpful in very small quantities when you're trying to adjust to a new time zone and taking it for 1 or 2 nights. I don't think melatonin is a great long-term solution to take. I think I would start with all the other things I've talked about in the class, and there's of course many more solutions, but thinking about your technology use, thinking about your wind down routine, thinking about how much exercise you're getting, thinking about how much time you allow between going to bed or eating dinner and going to bed. Thinking about all those changes first before relying on other sleep aids is my recommendation. Marijuana, is it good or bad to help with sleep? It can help some people with sleep for sure, and CBD oil as well. It's worth trying if you're having trouble and you've tried all the other things first. I'd recommend all the other things first before any of these, but yeah, I think it can be helpful for some people. Let's see, Lauren asked, what are my suggestions for waking up in the middle of the night and having trouble getting back to sleep? A lot of people suggest getting out of bed actually and going to like a couch if you have another place that's quiet with very low lighting. What I wouldn't recommend is getting up and getting on the computer or getting on an iPad or any kind of digital device. I'd recommend doing something very relaxing. So maybe it's lying down on a couch, reading a book or a magazine, or listening to calming music. And then if you get sleepy, then actually returning to bed so that your bed is sort of that sacred sleeping space. Mary asks, what about Ambien? So again, definitely the real sleep aids are questions for a doctor. And if you do have a serious sleeping problem, there's a time and a place, but I would actually encourage trying to do every possible thing before resorting to some of the hardcore sleep aids like Ambien. There's a lot of evidence that they have a lot of other side effects and are highly addictive. So I would try to do everything possible you can first. Is TV an electronic device, as you're using the term? Yes, I don't think having a television like across the room is as bad for keeping you up as having a phone or an iPad next to your face, which is what most of us do. And most of us do that in bed, by the way. But I would say that trying to turn off all electronics a few hours before bed can be very helpful if you're having trouble with sleep. It isn't just the light, it's also just the agitation. Like most of the things we watch on TV are not relaxing. And sometimes they're not negative, they get you all amped up. And so, you know, I know everyone's in such habits of watching TV and watching movies and being on our gadgets late at night, but if you're having trouble sleeping, I'd highly recommend trying different things. And if you can, trying to, maybe it's listening to calming music, maybe it's listening to an app like the Calm app or the Headspace app. They have a lot of interesting sleep stories. I think there's a lot of other things that can be calming that are worth trying. Let's see, thoughts on polyphasic sleep practices. So what Victor's referring to is when people are sleeping in chunks. So we have a monophasic sleep cycle where most of us, mostly because of the circumstances of our society now, we sleep in one big chunk at night. But our ancestors who had a lot more flexibility, they would often, you know, they'd go to bed when it was dark out because they didn't have iPads and lights keeping them awake at night. And so they would just go to bed when it was dark. And then they might wake up at 2 in the morning, and then they might be up for several hours, and they would use that time to, maybe they would be creative, they'd write poetry, they'd have sex, they'd eat, they do other things, and then they'd go back to bed for another chunk of time. And that seemed to work. I think I don't have any challenge with that whole schedule. The problem is that for most of us, we don't have that flexibility because most of us need to be up in the morning to go to jobs or to take care of children or do other things. So it's really more an issue of our society not really being as flexible, or most of us having schedules that aren't as flexible these days. Let's see. Any other questions? I'm just trying to scroll through here. If any of you wrote to me privately, I'll try to get back to you after the webinar privately. What about TV in another room? I would say TV in a room that's not your bedroom is better than having TV in the bedroom. But I'd say even just having TV on late at night, it can sometimes delay when people get tired. And so if you can turn off all electronic devices earlier in the evening, it can help with sleep. But for sure, trying to not watch TV in the bedroom. And I'm sorry, I know that this is a lot of news people probably don't want to hear. What about animals? Animals actually do wake people up quite a lot in some situations. So everyone has a different situation. I know a lot of people keep their pets in their bedroom, but it can be very disruptive. So that's a very personal question, but it can be very disruptive of your sleep. So, okay. Great. Looks like a lot of you have committed to a great sleep schedule. Got the Flux app in there. Some of you have asked about the Kindle, of whether the Kindle is bad as far as the blue light as a laptop or an iPad. There is a Kindle that is supposed to have significantly, the Paperwhite version is supposed to have significantly less blue light. And I did a lot of research on this because I was going to get one. I was supposed to hike the Pacific Crest Trail this summer before COVID, and then my trip got canceled. And I was going to get a Kindle for that trip, and I learned that it still doesn't have zero blue light. It still has a little bit of blue light, is my understanding. So while it's better than an iPad in terms of blue light, it's still not a perfect solution. And the best solution is really a good old-fashioned paper book as far as blue light. Great. Yeah, I don't feel guilty about getting more than 8. If you have the flexible schedule of being able to get more than 8 and you feel good, great. You might need more than 8. 7 to 9 is the recommended average, so for adults. So especially now, this is a really challenging time, and there's a lot more stress in everyone's lives than normal. And I would say, if your body is, feeling good after being asleep for 8 hours, I'd say go with it. Great. What about pillows? Pillows, I think, is just a really personal question as far as comfort, as far as just making your bed as comfortable as possible. And people have very different preferences there. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer on the pillow department. I think it's really quite personal. Yeah, great. So there's a few, I will, any wake up routines to stay awake? Is that a wake up routine in the morning? Getting natural light in the morning is one of the best things that you can do in the morning. Exercise, or even just a brisk walk outside in natural light. That's one of the best ways to wake up, as well as helping with your circadian rhythm. Do weighted blankets really help sleep? You know, there's been a lot of chatter about weighted blankets. For those of you who haven't heard of them, they're basically a heavier blanket they're now available like everywhere, like Bed Bath & Beyond, Amazon, everywhere has these weighted blankets. I used to be sort of skeptical, just thought they were a bit gimmicky, but to be totally honest, I have an extra blanket that I was using this winter just because it's really cold. I live in Bozeman, Montana, it's freezing here. And I'm finding that I still have it. I still use it now, even though it's not cold out. And so there's something sort of comforting. And the whole idea behind the weighted blanket is it makes people feel like they're sort of being swaddled. There have been some evidence that's been helpful for some folks with autism and some other things they're dealing with to make them feel better. And then also for folks who don't have any issues. So I think I think anything's worth trying if it might improve your sleep, and it seems to be helpful for some people, so I don't want to dismiss it. Okay, what about podcasts? Is falling asleep to words disruptive to sleep as opposed to music? No, I think podcasts can be great as long as they're relaxing and calming topics. I mean, it's similar, frankly, to reading. I mean, I don't know about you, but I find that if I actually am reading something that's like extremely stimulating, then I can't go to bed because I'm really interested in it. So I think podcasts can be similar. And so finding the right balance of something that's still interesting enough, but it's not going to keep your brain worrying for the next 3 hours. But I think podcasts can be great, definitely, and definitely a better solution than looking at screens right next to your face. Great. So yeah, for those of you who've asked private questions, I will try to reply on the chat board privately. Does anyone else have any questions, any public questions that you want to ask on the chat board? Ashley asks, can you tell us more about the Oura Ring? Is it the best device to keep track of your sleep compared to all the other devices out there? Yes, I do think it is the best device. This is the Oura Ring I mentioned earlier. I've had it for about 18 months. Oura, I think, is the best sleep tracker out there. So if sleep is your biggest priority, it's great. It has an app for your phone. So every night, I'm wearing this all night, and in the morning I look at the app and I can see how much REM I got, how much deep sleep, how long it took me to fall asleep, how much overall sleep I got. And then it's also tracking my activity, and it's tracking my readiness. So it looks at like my resting heart rate and my heart rate variability and a number of other factors to decide, am I ready the next day for a big workout, for example, or is it better for me to take the day off? Interestingly, Oura just partnered with the NBA and the women's NBA. And one of the things that Oura is now doing, which I don't think it was originally intended for, is it's now helping predict COVID cases because it tracks your temperature. And so it's able to help predict whether some of these athletes have gotten COVID or should start getting tested because their temperature raises in their ring from their sleep the night before. Is 6 hours enough sleep? No, 7 to 9 is really what we should all be shooting for as adults. Is the webinar recording going to be available? Yes, actually, this was apparently recorded, and I believe a link is going to be sent out to all attendees. So for anyone who missed it or for anyone who arrived late. So with that, I will stick around and try to answer some of the private questions that were asked on the chat board, and or if anyone wants to unmute, I will stick around for a few more minutes. But for those of you who do have things to do, I wanted to just say thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us tonight. Really fantastic to chat with you all about sleep. So thanks, and I hope that you get a lot of rest tonight.
And on behalf of the Princeton Club of Northern California,